Hello.
Hello.
So, I have already several people. Cool. I'll share my screen. But, the topics. This is what we have on the agenda. I don't know. So I have deviation and transactions. I think this goes together, I guess, Alex, probably, if we discuss this.
Sorry, which show going together?
The responsibility of deviation correction, this one?
Yeah, this is the one with spillover from last week.
Yes, yeah. But I think if they go together is what I'm trying to say, those two, right?
Maybe not. I think the deviation transaction update is this deviation CR that you were working on last time, and this next one is about the responsibility. Which component does this? I don't know. We can keep it together or separate. It's fine.
Yeah, they are related. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know whether Gergely is here or whether he will join. There is a topic on CNCF. Maybe we can. Is anyone objecting to move this project to CNCF? And I'll ask Gergely to explain what it means. I mean, I don't think it means it has a change on the way of working, but so the way it works in CNCF is you go from graduating and then you all the way want to move up the ladder, right? And what it means is that, so first of all, the good thing is with having it in CNCF, from my perspective, is that it has a governance body surrounding it. So that means that nobody can really pull the project away, right? Or change the license and stuff like that, right? Although we have no intention to do so, but that has more guarantee. Plus it gets more visibility beyond the team that we have right now, right? So it's possible even that you can go to KubeCon and have a booth and things like that, right? But you have to pay. So I don't know what that means and stuff like that. But I think just in general, the governance around it, I think is an important one, right, for many people to adopt. Right? So my main question is anyone having a problem doing so? Okay, I'll take that for now. Yeah, so we are just, so the idea is that we are starting the instantiation, and Gergely is the person that has done it for other projects. So I wanted to invite him to actually get an update. I asked him to join, but it was unsure that he could join. Yeah. Okay, and then we have action.
How does it work? Do they take anything that's proposed to them, or is there a voting process involved, or like, I have no clue.
Yeah, there is I have been a bit involved. Yeah, there is some voting. So what you want, if we do it, we have to prepare ourselves. But yeah, you have to have multiple companies voting to do it. I will also reach out to the Nephew community because SDC has they are integrating with SDC from a Nephew perspective as well, right? So there will be people from that community as well who probably will like that, and there might be others, right? So, but we need to find some people helping us and support it, because what happens is if you submit it, then they will ask some people to chime in, and then you have to have people say yes or no and stuff like that. But it's, yeah. So once you get through that gate, you'll get accepted.
Is that just these support things, or do we have to polish something around code?
No, we already do,
testing,
right?
anything
like OSSF scores and stuff like that, but we already have. So Gergely has been enabling the projects on that. Then there is maintain and contribute. So we already have been driving the system in the way to get there, right? So it's not that we have to do major things. So Gergely, that's why I wanted to invite Gergely to explain.
Yep.
Because he knows all nitty-gritty details.
All right, then yeah, we wait for his.
Yeah, wait till he.
response. Yeah. Cheers.
And then we have action CRD. So Alex, and then logging. I also put you, Alex. I don't know whether you have something. Is there any other topic? Severin, I think you were there. Maybe we should also have the discussion on SDK or something like that, right? And CLI tools, maybe, right? I'll just edit.
SDK and CLI, probably, yes.
Yeah. I put your name, but it can be, did I spell it correct? Severin? Probably not. I'll correct it, yeah. All right. Anything else? Okay. And maybe Hans, do you want to share where we are?
Yep. So over the, I guess, last 2 weeks, we've been testing and validating a bunch of PRs that were submitted against a bunch of the repos. So the repos involved are the SDC Protos, data server, cache, and config server. Because we basically came up with a new way of handling deviations. So before these PRs, basically you applied intent against the system, against the Kubernetes config server. And if you would make changes on the actual device via netconf, CLI, or GNMI, our sync process would pick up that change, would report a deviation, and config server would automatically, based on that sync interval, reapply the same intent, making it so that if you would alter the device directly, that the original intent would be applied again, and such the manual change would be overwritten. So what we did is, in this PR, we added some functionality to be able to alter this behavior. So by default, we will still honor the intent. And if you apply intents which get transacted to the device and you do manual CLI changes, every sync interval, we will check whether or not there are deviations against the intent. The default behavior is revertiveness. So it means that we will check that there are changes and we will reapply the intent as it was defined through the Kubernetes API. So with this PR, we also introduced a flag in the intent, which is called revertive, which you can set to false. And if you then create alternate config through the CLI or directly on box or whatever, we will pick up that change through the sync process, and then config server will be responsible of reapplying a deviation intent of the deviations that we catched and making it persistent until someone, an operator of the network, will clear the deviation by deleting it, altering the CLI configuration directly on the device and restoring it. So until an operator takes action to clear that deviation. So we tested it extensively, and with that, a number of bugs that were there in the system for quite a while surfaced because we were testing this. In the meanwhile, we've corrected those as well. So that's the behavior that's going to be that's part of this PR. I believe when in your PR you also did a bunch of changes, making sure that changes that need to be transacted through config server are aggregated on a per target basis, correct?
Yeah, it's grouped now together. Yeah, that's the other change. Big change is that we don't transact per config, but we transact per target. Actually, we transact the changes on a target.
So yeah, a config server will aggregate changes on a per target basis. Obviously, scenarios are still possible where changes are scattered across multiple transactions, just because of the nature of the aggregation behavior. So if you just fall out of the transaction, it will be picked up on the next run. So that's also in there. The only thing that we still have to do on deviations and transactions is we have to make it part of integration testing. So considering the code is now manually tested and deemed okay, I will make sure that this gets into the testing pipeline as well. So each new PR that we create, we will test the deviation behavior as well. So every time new code comes in, we can check that. And then I believe we are at a good stage to merge those PRs into main and look into what our next release is going to be, right? So we'll have to have a discussion with which other open PRs there are, and then we can start looking into bumping the versions of all of the related repos. Yeah, so that's my update. I don't know when, Marcus, if you want to add something.
No, I think the only thing is that we should try to release it as soon as possible, I think, right?
Yep.
We should try to, I think there was a few issues that we have to correct, right? Which I think we did in the meantime. So I think the sooner we have it in integration, the better it will be for all of us, right?
Yeah. So I see, Marcus, there is an open PR regarding to the config diff adjustments. I assume before we release, we would like to get that in as well.
Yeah, that's the statistics on the validation, right?
Yeah.
So until now, we just processed the validations. And for config diff, I thought it was a nice one to have some more insight other than a simple validation succeeded. And yeah, this adds some statistics that tell you X must statements have been validated, Y range ranges, and yeah, for all of the validations that we have implemented. So yeah, that would be a good and easy one to integrate.
I guess other than that, I don't know. I saw Alex, you did a number of we merged the PR to main last week. I don't know if you have any subsequent changes that need to go in either.
No.
Okay, cool. Then I guess we're good to go after these changes get merged, and we can think about bumping the versions.
Yeah, that is this PR. I think we also want to merge. I think. I don't know whether you did in the config server. Does to present the Git hash? This one here.
Yeah.
This we can also take.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that was it from my side.
Yeah, thanks. So maybe Alex, let's maybe first tackle this topic, if that's okay, right?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, well, you've discussed now, Hans, you explained that the data server is getting this list of sync changes from the device compared with this intent, and then sending these deviations back to the config server, and the config server then reapplies the intent to correct these deviations. And in this case, the task of setting data is a little bit split between data server and config server. In the sense that the data server is not responsible for actually correcting anything, it's just setting and then reading from the device. And the question here is, should we think about the possibility that data server is also responsible for correcting these deviations, or moving this logic of we find a deviation, we report it to config server, and then config server then sets the correct configuration of the device, or if data server is just responsible for this entire process of maintaining the config, the running config being equal to all the sum of the intents for that device. And this is something I wanted to start discussing a little bit.
Yeah, but the reason why we opted for the current approach is that no matter what you do, you still have to report, right?
Yeah, correct.
And so by having the ability to create your policy, so the idea is that basically the data server, for all its purposes, is basically it executes the stuff on behalf of someone, right? That's kind of what it does, right? And so if you start taking action independently, you lose some capabilities of, like, say, so you have to introduce all the policy framework, and as well as you still need to report no matter what, right? So the idea is that so the reporting is there, right? And then what to do with it is basically decoupled. So if you look at it, the data server is becoming an executor. And the idea is also that the data server is scaling to larger sets and stuff like that, right? So that's why we have this framework, because if you look to what we did, for example, for revertive and non-revertive, the policy is in one place. So if you start to take action locally, you don't really get the full visibility anymore.
But this would still be something that's communicated as part of this intent, right? And this is anyway transferred over to the data server.
Yeah, but so for example, if you change so right now the policy is, so the idea is that data server, we at the moment there is only one, but in some deployments there will be many, right? So that means right now with a single API server change on the policy, we can basically change from revertive to non-revertive. That means that we have to distribute all that logic. You see?
But this would be the same as distributing the intent, which you would have to do anyway, right?
No, because the API, you would have to have that there is an API server that you have to communicate with, and then you have to take action from there, right? My question is the following, Alex, right? What do you believe that we can solve with this versus what we have?
Yeah. So the big issue I see is the number of actions that have to be performed on the data tree inside data server, because now it's with okay, let me think in my head, sorry. We have the fetching data from the device.
Yes.
Right. We have the reading from the of the default values into the tree as well.
Yeah, but that's part of the job basically, right?
Sure. We have the intents being set. We have these comparisons being performed, and the deviations being calculated.
Yeah.
Right. And if we were already to know how to deal with deviations in the data server, we would be able to drop this calculate deviations as a separate step, and it could become part of already the sync that's been done from the device. So then we would have just one continuous loop there, right, for this syncing. Because now there are two separate threads that are doing this task of, one, getting data from the device, and two, calculating these differences and sending it back to the config server. And they have two different periods, and I have seen that there have been an issue with the actual fixing of the or the restoration of intended configuration on the device, and I don't know if it's attributed towards this difference, like these two loops, or something else, and that's something that I'd like to look into when the new release comes out. But I think that it would simplify things down if the deviation calculation is already part of the syncing from the device. Obviously, you can still report on it.
But that's, for me, that's an implementation as such, right? Because there is nothing by decoupling what we have right now that you do it during the syncing or during it afterwards. The problem with syncing is that you never know when it's done. So let me take a step back. The reason why we have it decoupled right now is because at the moment we do sync with get config, right? But originally when we started it, and the reason why we do it like this right now is because it's the least common denominator, but it's not the best solution. The best solution is that the device has unchanged capability, right? So it means that you actually get a stream of changes, and that is driving your running, right? Yeah. And as a result, so that is, if you have a device that supports that, that's what you want to enable. But we don't see many devices doing that properly today. So that's why we implemented this get config, and we still want to support get config as such, right? But for example, if you want to support other sync strategies to the device, right? You want to have some decoupling. Because otherwise you're continuously driving deviation. You see, so the reason why we have decoupled it is for there is other scenarios than just get config.
Sure. Okay. Fine.
Because our best the best way or the best solution is actually that you get a stream of changes from the device, right? And it's not periodically synced. It's actually a stream.
Yeah, that's true. But then there's
that
still
is our
yeah. Go on. Sorry, go ahead.
That is our best. That's what our preferred solution, but unfortunately, not many devices have capabilities for that, and even devices that do have bugs. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, in general, it would be nice, and it was initially also my preferred way of doing it, to simply flag the intended revertiveness of a config to a data server, and do all the calculations there, and only inform config server about the actual state of the network. Because I mean, in the end, it is clear by setting revertive or non-revertive what the actual state of the network is supposed to be, right? So
yeah, but for example, it's not only revertive and non-revertive, but it's also so Marcus, just to be clear, we also want to basically clear deviations, right? So you need to have an interface to do that and report upon that and determine based on the strategy what you have to do. So what I'm trying to say is that you start duplicating the logic in two places, which is never a good thing.
Isn't config server then responsible for too much? Because it's supposed to be the interface with the Kube API to SDC, right? The internal data server.
Yeah, but
now it's responsible for managing changes on the device as well as this interface, because it's the one that's then choosing whether or not a deviation should be resolved or not, or an intent should be set again or not. Whereas, I mean, this is then performing multiple tasks in one.
No, see, what it basically does at the moment, what it does, it basically triggers on the event loop of Kubernetes, right? So why we do that is because that's the interface that you have, right? And you just report. And so what it does right now, like any other controller, it calculates the diff, right? Or the change. and it reports the change to the data server. That's all it does, and that's what a regular controller does. It doesn't try to do more than that, and it does that based on policy. So in other words, it checks what has changed, and that it communicates.
But it communicates by forcing this config apply again, right?
It basically sends the intents that are changing as well as the deviation, depending on whether they are non-revertive to the config server, to the data server to transact. That's what it does. Because, for example, if you want to do network-wide transaction, which is also implemented, I mean, it's at the moment implemented in config server, but the idea is to separate it. You anyhow need something centrally that coordinates it.
Yeah, but this would just be passing on the user's desires, wants to something that's then actually doing this the actual management of the config, right?
Oh, but what I'm trying to say, Alex, it's always the same procedure. So it's just I'm always of the opinion you should do you should say this responsibility is in one place and try to replicate that as much as possible. What the reason I'm more and more convinced that what we did is right at the moment is because we can reuse the pattern in multiple scenarios, right? And I think that's always a good that's a good feedback to actually see that you're on the right track. So, for example, network-wide transactions, I don't have to do any change in data server, which is very good, right? Whether it's deviations or not, there's no change. So we have the capabilities now to do so. So that's for me a reason to say that's a good framework, right? So we are on the good track to do so. And of course, if there is a change or something that you say, okay, those two things run in parallel, and there is some optimization, we have to look at the optimization, but we don't necessarily have to change the whole framework. Yeah. You see, so for network-wide transaction, for example, it's always the same. You calculate the diff, and you basically apply that to the data server, and he is executing upon it. So in other words, it's all of these scenarios behave in the same way. And that's, I think, a good thing.
Yeah, okay.
Because at the end of the day, a deviation, when you are in non-revertive case, a deviation became a config snippet at the end of the day. We don't call it config, we call it deviation, but at the end of the day, it became a config that came from the device. So in other words, we have configs that come from the user, and we have configs that come from the bottom line, and basically, so we treat them as config snippets, and we treat them the same way.
Right, but this is also something that's represented in a data server the same way, right? I mean,
yeah, correct. So you could argue it. Yeah, so you could argue with the fact that at some point you can you could actually say at some point execute that in one place, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but then we are not discussing who does what, and then it's basically saying, okay, just aggregate it together. I've been thinking around that as well, right? But even then, you still need a function that sits on top. I think you still want to implement it in two separate buckets. And the reason why I'm not convinced that we should do it at the moment is because at some point we want to distribute the data server, irrespective of the config server, and I think then you'll see that what we did is actually okay. I've been thinking also about the responsibilities, but I have the feeling right now that there is no reason to change anything.
No, that's fair. I want to bring it up as a discussion point because it's something playing around with, and for me, even if you're distributing the data server across multiple, it's still going to be communicating with the device, and it'll still have a set of intents, right? Yeah. And it knows what the intent should be on that device. It knows what's on the device, and it could then resolve these and report what it's done back to this aggregation layer, right? which in this case it's the config server, but in theory that means it's now closely coupled with the config server because it expects the config server to tell it what to do next and so on. It couldn't be a standalone piece, and that's maybe the one thing. Like that's maybe what initially got it. My thoughts going for this was that for me the config server is an interface between Kubernetes and the SDC components.
Yeah, but so what you could say is if you want to have a standalone module, right? You basically take the config server piece and basically add that on as a layer on top, right? So because if you look to the current implementation, there is a transactor. If you look to all the code, there is a transact interface. So it's a separate module that does all of this.
For a config server or data server? No, sorry.
Config server. So if you look right now, what I did is that all this function that basically checks the div is a separate piece of code. And the only thing that the reconciler of the config server does, it basically triggers it, and that's it.
Yeah.
You just could take that piece. If you really want to build it standalone, the idea for me was, okay, I take that piece of code and put it somewhere else, because that's what I'm going to do when we do network-wide transaction, is I just take that piece of code and then execute this X amount of time.
Yeah, sure. But then this transactor sort of, in a sense, doesn't belong to a config server directly, right?
Yeah, but you see at the moment config server as one block. I see it as a moment. It is aggregating it, but if you look to each of these controllers are independent things, right? So you could basically set the ID. If you look to the code, you could actually split it up and put that into multiple executables that are completely disaggregated. The reason why we bundled it right now is just, okay, that's for convenience, but the idea is you, like the transactor, like the workflow, you could, I think we should build this by its own controller. That's how it's built at the moment. It's like the network-wide transaction controller is a completely separate controller, and if you host it in another pod, it will do its thing independently. Right? Even like the discovery and stuff like that, we could actually separate it completely somewhere else.
Yeah, fine. That's, I guess, by design for these Kubernetes operators anyway.
Yeah, correct. So that's so we should not look at config server as a big blob. We should look at it as a function, and that's how it's built at the moment, right? So have this independent components that you can instantiate at various locations. And some people want to have it very simple, all in one, like we have right now. But going forward, I feel that there will be people who want to scale it out and basically separate some of these things as independent elements. But the system should still work as is.
Okay. Yeah, I think maybe it's worth looking at how these things could be split, because I mean I know that's a goal down the road, right? To have these components split up, but I think it would be important to look into this as well as we start getting closer towards.
Yeah. So I think if you look to my personal view is like we have so deviations, right? So then the next big item is, I think, network-wide transaction, but we are very close with the change that we did for deviations. And I think your action CRD, and the other thing that we still miss, I think we still have to fix, is the security, the secrets.
Yeah.
To augment the configs with some snippets that are hash protected, right? I think that's still an important one. And I think then once we have those, I think we should look at scale.
Yeah.
And then all logging and all the visibility and stuff like that, right? Then we should segregate it.
Good.
Yeah. So I would say let's keep for the time being, and we can always revise, right? But I have the feeling that at the moment I don't see that. I think personally, I think the separation is actually good at the moment, because you do all of this stuff in one place at the moment.
But I'm not sure I completely agree with it being done all in one place.
But what I'm saying is in one, not in, you don't look at, what I'm not trying to say is that it's all in config server. It's one place that has the transactionality know-how, which is reusable for revertive, non-revertive, as well as network-wide transaction. It's one and the same code for all of that.
Yeah, because the config server can decide whether or not to apply this intent, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, the function that you have to look at, it's a way to communicate to the data server the pieces of configs that matter, right?
Yeah, good. No, it's just something I wanted to bring up. I mean, obviously, if it gets to something where it makes sense to bring it up again, we can look into it again.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
All right. Then let's look at, I think the next topic is actions, right?
Yep. That's me again.
Yes, that's okay.
Yeah, but actually, so from our team, Leah was working on this, but she's gone on vacation as of this week. So I will present what she put together.
All right. I'll stop sharing.
Let me see if it works the first time. Okay, I need to probably restart the call.
Okay.
I can give permission for it to share my screen. Let me see.
I stop sharing.
Yeah, okay, I need to quit and rejoin.
You need to get permission. Or
yeah.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, then just give me a second and I'll join back again. Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. Severin will give you, yeah, it's a discussion, right? Maybe you need 10. Yeah, we'll see how far we get with the actions.
No worries.
Yeah. But I think the ID, I think why the SDK and CLI topic is there. Okay, Alex is back. Yeah. Okay. You have to unmute, I think, Alex.
Sorry, thanks. Let's see if it works this time.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Then, so looking at this the CRD. So this is taking what was spoken about last week, and added as comments in the GitHub issue. We have this proposal to create a new config CR responsible for having information about how to call, an action CR with the information how to call an action. And we spoke a little bit about how to represent this in a transaction. So we'd have a pre-actions as a config and then post-actions run. How this transaction is organized is something that we need to then also discuss, whether we have a begin transaction and end transaction, or if it's implicit or whatever. That's something that would then come up.
Yeah.
And then
today the interface is asynchronous, right?
Yeah, it's with the apply of one config, it's creating a transaction and then confirming it.
Yeah, no, at the moment, what happens right now is that we just get work, right? And the work is config changes, deviation changes, right? Or target changes, right? Which basically is an apply on the, so you basically create a Kubernetes object, right? And so based on an event triggered on that, you basically aggregate all the data. You see, so right now, that's why I'm saying it's asynchronous. So in Kubernetes, unless you write a webhook, right, you don't have a synchronous interface. Now, we could write a synchronous interface because we own the API server, But by default, the Kubernetes controller is async, right?
Yeah, but it will only do one reconciliation at a time, right? But yes, you don't know which one will be first.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but so here for this pre and post actions, in this case we're looking at with this references. So this was also something we discussed last time, whether we have these references or whether it just discovers actions. In this case, we have references, and this would be an array of actions in the spec. For each config snippet, we have what this path value. I suppose this could also be something there, or whether it's something at a higher level in the config CR. We could also discuss that. This focuses a bit more on just the way that the action CR should look. So then an example of what an action XML looks like for netconf. You have the RPC outer layer with then action, and then the action has your tree eventually calling then the actual action that will be there. So this would be then in this case it's represented as sort of debug routing table, but then I'll come to a more complex example afterwards, which has data in it as well to help locate a specific part of the config tree. So in this simple case, we would then have our action CR with the type, so post or pre. This is what we discussed as well last time. Transaction reference, this would have to be some way of specifying this. Presumably would not be a spec field, but would need to somehow be tied to, would be part of the transaction manager that then is solving these links between the config and the actions, and then creating a transaction around it with this begin and end and so on. And then for the action itself, then we have the tree. This is the same as in the config snippet, where you have then the config with the path and value. This could also be something that's there as well. We could also have it replicated in exactly the same way as the config. So you would have the path, which would then give you already sort of, you wouldn't have to have the debug routing, for example. You could already have that part of the path. And then the on failure action. So this is in the case of a rollback, the action that would be called when there's a failure.
Now the question I have here, Alexander, I mean, is the following: does it have to be on a per config snippet, or is it a global thing? Because for the exact same reason that I was saying before, if you look to the Kubernetes API, it's async by default. So for example, the way that I've implemented, or that I was implementing network-wide transactions, right? Because it's actually a synchronous thing, okay? So what you do is you get work, right? And the work in this case is a git ref change, okay? So it's one work. In the git ref change, you take all the data that is in the repo, in this case, right? And you transact them all together. And so you basically, so one way is you take all the actions, you do the pre-actions, right? Then you do your config stuff, right? And then you do your post actions, right? But you do all of them, right?
Yeah.
Versus doing it on a per config snippet basis, that means, I mean, at the moment we have kind of removed. So at the moment we have, because of the fact of the deviations, we have basically aggregated all the configs in one big blob at the moment, right? Like we did for the deviation. So in other words, we no longer have we still have, but we actually no longer have a per config, let's say, interface to the device.
Yeah. So my question there would be, so this would be the case that I'm imagining for the actual use case, not the example here, is a day one action. So at the end of the day one config apply, we would need to do this action. But then afterwards, day 2 would still come, but we don't need to run this day 1 action after day 2 is applied.
And does it harm if you still run it or not?
I do not think it does. For that specific action, I don't know for other actions if that would be the same.
Can we somehow tie it to a specific configuration value? Like if that configuration value shows a deviation or is applied for the first time, then this action need to be triggered. Is what I'm thinking right now.
Then action like for the database, like format database, an example she gave us, I would say that they are probably, it's important at what point it's done.
Yeah, what I know from this is that it doesn't matter if you call it multiple times, but it has to be done after, but it would only succeed if it's done after the initial day 1 is there. For applying it to like tying it to a value, I could see that working for this case, I think would be okay. So this is rewritten because it's a similar idea, but with a slightly different wording and layout. The idea being that you have a list of items. So this is a bit more of a complex case, but I think it would tie in quite nicely with this. So I'll just go forward here, and then we can maybe stop and discuss a bit afterwards. So a list of interfaces, and we select an interface by name, potentially select a sub-interface by name, and then run some initialization. In this case, passing just some values to that. In this case, you could tie this action to this sub-interface, right? So anytime there's a change to the sub-interface, you maybe would have to do initialize or reinitialize or something like this. In the case of the actions that we have one call to initialize and another call here's interface. In the reality, it's a database where one is responsible for initializing the database, and the others are responsible for updating the topology of the database, so connecting back to this database, the initial one that was created. So I'm not sure how it would look if you were to change this, if you could do initialize database again, or if you would have to then just do an update. That would be the question there. But in theory, right, having this sub-interface as your sort of tie-in point would allow you to then call this action whenever this changed, which could be desired behavior, right? I don't know,
because that's the other option, right? Is that you just take an action CR without a dependency, and you just say it's dependent to this path.
Without dependency, you mean like without this reference?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, that's also true.
And you basically create a dependency on the path, right? And then you give it to data server, and data server sees if there is a change, it will execute it or not. Is that better? Is that
what happened? Yeah, I mean, that's fine because we can apply this multiple times, but I guess this would also cause actions to be triggered whenever the config server restarts as well.
no.
It's only when the deviation is found. And if you're, when so it basically, in this case, you delegate the function to the data server. So the data server is responsible for actions, right? And he, which I think is the right place, right? So you, what you do is that basically if he knows, like Marcus was saying, if a path changes and you tie it to it, then it will execute it each time that path changes. Yeah.
In which case, the dependency to the config CR is no longer needed. You see, so you actually, the dependency is the path, so it's the content of the action rather than the CR itself.
Yeah, true. This could work.
And then then the question is, do you need to embed the? What I don't like is that, do you have to represent it as XML, or can you represent it as YAML?
Yeah. So I mean, here this
Okay.
is the YAML version of it,
Yes.
which
Okay.
is following the same structure as what you'd have in the config CR, but with action instead of config.
And could you do here, Alex? Could you basically put the path outside of the action, and or it has to be included because the XML action is there? What I'm trying to say is that, can you do like in config server, we have a path reference and then we have the blob, if you see what I'm saying, right? So when
I think
you
this
do something,
because it's an implementation part of the data server, right?
because then the data server also has a clear view. Okay, this is the path. If something changes here, and it has many means, then I do this action. You see?
That specific case would only work for something like this, where the action is sort of dependent on its parent in the tree. But let's take, I mean, this is an example. Let's take this dump routing table.
Yeah, that needs to be a separate field for that, pointing to.
Now, Now, personally, dump routing table, in my view, seems to be like an action that you take outside of the config.
Yeah.
Methods.
Yes.
I mean,
completely agree.
Because I see the actions that I think we should focus on is the action related to the config changes. But there will be like the same in a transactor or an actuator, right? So you sometimes need to, before you do the transaction, you want to validate status and what have you, right? Like the routing table, right? You want to fetch it to see what happens before and after, right? Those type of actions, in my view, we should separate from the ones that are tied to the configuration.
By separate, you mean?
Because these are typically, you want to execute them synchronous anyhow, right? So in other words, I want to do this activity, I want to do this change. As part of this change, I want this to happen first, then this second, and then third, give me all the data. Okay, if that's all good, now I'm going to do the change. You see?
Yeah, no.
In other words, those actions, in my view, are to be treated differently than the actions that are related to the configuration itself.
No, yeah, that's true. I don't have an example of something else. It was just more that there could be an action that's not to a specific subtree or branch of the tree, where just having the path outside would not make just using, for example, here, right? If we were to say, okay, our initialize interface is within this interface sub-interface with S0 sub-interface SI0. If we were to tie it with this, then that's fine, but we shouldn't force it to always be tied to the parent that it's belonging.
But you could also do slash, for example, right? Which means any change that you see onto the device, you execute.
Yeah, but then the question is, so in the config CR, right, you have this config with the path and value keys, right? And that will just say where this config will go in the tree.
Yes.
I think for an action, it should be the same, but the path that's there should be for where this action takes place. And there should be another one like watch path or the naming, whatever, can change. But that would be the path that would be deciding when the action is taken or not.
Okay, there's two separations. You mean you separate the two?
Yeah, because then, okay, this dump routing table, obviously, yeah, it's a synchronous thing. It's something that you would not do as part of an SDC configuration. But there might be a different one, let's say, sort of finalize or something like this.
Initialize a database or something like that, right? That's like I don't know how the system is, but in a DB or something like that would be a global thing, right?
Yeah, which might be not under the root configuration, but might need to watch the root, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, you could separate, right? So you could say, yeah, there is a path for change, and there is a path of where it has to be applied. Yeah, that's I think okay.
Something that might also occur is that you query the device not for config but for state information and base an action on that, right? Just to keep that in the back of our head.
Which would work with this path, right?
Yeah, but I think, yeah, so Marcus, my personal view is we should avoid putting all of that into data server, because what you're building a workflow manager at some point, right? That's not what so in other words, that's the reason why I'm also trying to say, like, show routing tables should be outside, because that's a workflow manager job, right? I think the things that fit into SDC are the things that are, let's say, actions take part of configuration. These are the ones that I think we have to include. Like initialize a database before you can apply this change, or initialize it after you have applied this change. That, yes, but I think from the moment you start to tie operational thing, you see that you will fall short on many things. And I think there are solutions out there today that we can just leverage to actually, like, I would take Argo workflow and integrate the steps into something like that, rather than trying to reinvent it yourselves again, because you end up building a workflow manager. If you start to tie too many of these things together that are not tied to the configuration. If you see what I'm saying.
I think that for us, the important case is this one, right?
Yeah, correct.
Where we actually have a tie with the config.
Because all the rest, I think we should build outside of it, right? There is many solutions available today that address that part, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this dump routing table is something that the network engineer would go and run.
Yeah, correct. So that's something you typically do in a workflow manager, right? So you basically dump it, you patch it somewhere, and then you compare once you're done.
Yeah. Then the last point that I wanted to go over here was this on failure action, where we could either define the action again, but the inverse, or you could tie it to another action CR that would, there are just two options. So it would then look up and run this action on failure. But that's, either or. Just an example of what could be done for this undo or rollback action that we spoke about before.
But if we focus on changes or actions related to the config, right? Then the question I think I would have is that I have the feeling we could model them independent of the config CR, right? And then have them triggered either globally before we go to the device, or afterwards, or tied to a change of a config.
It needs to be
path.
Specific to a target, though, right?
Yeah, correct. So it is per target, right? So it's always per target. So so everything I'm trying to say is per target. But so basically, the idea is that the action is either you do it before, or you do it after, or you do it when a certain path changes.
Okay, so three types then.
Yeah, so either globally, right? So for all the total configuration at the end, probably, right? And then when a path changes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, so pre, post, or watch.
Yeah.
Could be, right?
And then for pre and post, the question is it, do you do it all the time, or do you do it only when you change?
Okay, now
think of the data server, Alex, right? So what you have today is that, let's say we give it config, right? Nothing changes, you don't do anything. But that, let's say, a small piece of the config changes. So data server calculates a diff, right? And figures out, okay, this piece I need to change.
Mhm.
I have a global action and I have a post and a pre and a post, as well as for the path. What do I do with the pre and the post if only a piece of the config change?
Right, but then that would be based on the if the path. Okay, so here we're saying we have another type now, right? So we have.
I think there is.
Path,
Yeah,
but then path pre and path post as well, or.
I mean, the question is, what do you do? So you had on failure. Wait a minute. So let's maybe think about the per path, right? So you have. Do you need to distinguish create, delete, and fail?
So do we need a distinct?
Distinguish between create, so like a change, or a deletion, or yeah, is it I change a value?
For the global case, I mean, for a global case,
Oh.
I guess it should be whenever there's some commit done.
There's any change? Yeah, correct. I agree. Yeah.
And then for the path-based ones, it should be. Well, okay. In my eyes, we could keep with this pre and post, and then the path decides if it's global or specific to a value, because a path being a slash would be a global, right? Like the target path or
Then you could model the pre and the post like that, right?
Yeah, and if it's a
As a
slash, then it would be a global action, because it would monitor if anything in the tree changes, or if it's more specific. So for this interfaces, for example, then it would only call when it would be pre or post based on that value changing. And I think that this system covers all of those cases.
Yeah. Does that make sense, Matt?
Yeah.
The idea is actions are a resource as anything else without dependency, but the dependencies are in the path itself, right? And we might need an action set so that we just replicate it, I guess, right? Because it's the same on all the targets. We probably need the action set, but it's just convenience for the user. Just something replicates the action to all the targets or to a subset of the targets, like we have with config. And then the action path will determine global, and then maybe we need a post and a pre or something. But what is post? And a pre and post means before you config any change, and post is after any change. Right?
Yeah, exactly. In this.
That makes sense, yeah. It sounds reasonable, right? And then we have to validate. Do we have to validate? And there is all the validation against the schema, right? Like all the RPC.
This tree.
Yes. Yeah, and all there is action RPC in the schema. There is action RPC in the schemas and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We probably need to validate whether the input that was sent is actually correct or not. And things like that.
Yeah, we have the value. We have the in the Yang schema, it defines what the types of these parameters are and what the output as well. So we also have for the status having the output in the status. We can decide if it's there or in the config. But seeing as now we have it split from the config, I think it needs to have its own status for the output.
Yeah, correct. That's why it's better to have a separate action CR, not?
Yeah, agreed.
But that means that also in the transaction set, we have to report upon these, right?
Yeah, because if it fails, then you need to roll back, right?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, we are running out. We are over time, but yeah, that sounds reasonable. But I think we should change. So have the actions only focused on the ones related to config rather than doing any action across the board.
Yeah, no, it was just an example of a simple transaction, but it's just sort of irrelevant. But yes, I see that too. That's fine.
But I still feel that the data server should or can expose an action RPC that someone calls for this global stuff, right? So in other words, if we do so, we should probably also in data server allow for an action RPC that someone as a workflow manager could call just to do an action. You see what I'm saying? Such that the data server is a single entity that performs action to a device.
Instead of doing it to the device directly, you mean?
Yeah, but so what I'm trying to say is that I don't mind doing an action RPC on the data server that is consumed independent from config stuff. You see what I'm saying? Because I do see a possibility that you have a workflow manager that sits on top of config server or on top of Kubernetes or something like that, right? That is going to execute stuff.
Okay.
For these actions that he needs to perform on a device, I think it can still use the data server, but it would not use the Kubernetes API, is what I'm trying to say. It would just go straight to the data server, potentially, right? Or through a proxy or whatever, right? That execute these actions. So in other words, the data server is the action, it does all the actions, right? The ones related to config. But there is so if you look to the high level picture that I have in my mind, is you have a workflow manager of some sort, right? You have, which basically can do actions to data server. And then you have config changes that can include actions that go through, let's say, Kubernetes API, and then performs action on data server on the same data server for a given target. If you see what I'm saying.
Is there an advantage to doing that over just then directly sending a netconf to the device? I guess credentials would be.
Yeah, you have to manage all the credentials. You have to do with all the XML shit and things like that. So it's basically one way to parse everything, right?
Credentials is a negative, but also a pro point, right? Because otherwise we would have to have credentials now and secure that endpoint.
But the credentials we have in the target, right? So it's a secret for us.
No. Who can access that that actions gRPC endpoint?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Now
yeah,
we're just standing there and we're collecting data from the device and exposing it via a config server, right?
Yeah.
But if anyone can show up and trigger netconf actions via this gRPC interface, like how do we secure it, right?
Yeah, but that's where you have, for example, mutual TLS secrets and stuff like that. That are when you start up, you get an MTLS certificate, right? And
yeah, but you need to have RBAC or whatever, right? Not everyone is allowed to write. So now we're entering a space where we
no, but Marcus,
manage users and so on, right?
Yeah, but I said proxy or straight. So it's like you could have a proxy in between that does all of that stuff, right? Or something that does it.
But with the proxy, you would still need to somehow deal with the authentication.
Yeah, sure. Someone needs to do it no matter what, right? So yeah.
Yeah, but then the responsibility is then on SDC, right? Rather than the
On the proxy itself, right? Or if you have a proxy, it's basically the responsibility is there. The challenge that you have today in Kubernetes, I mean, you can do it, but the whole support. So for example, the way to do synchronous tasks, right? So if you look to what I did in Choreo, I have both synchronous as well as asynchronous behavior, right? Because I do believe that the world is not completely only declarative. There is still imperative workflows that you need to do. So this is a good example of that, right? So the way I do that in Choreo, right? You can have an action sub-resource that you can instantiate, and that's a synchronous call, right? So in other words, but Kubernetes in general, it has very bad support for this.
Yeah.
It has for its own resources, like logging is a synchronous interface, right? But it doesn't expose any of that to the outside world. So all the interfaces that you see from the outside is all async. It's one of the issues that I see with Kubernetes, personally. That's why in Choreo, I have what I did in Choreo is I basically built a synchronous interface. So for example, create branch, right? So create a workspace is a synchronous call. Like I have an action sub-resource, so you can actually instantiate this. So it's synchronous. So and by doing so, you solve all the credentials and stuff like that. Whereas in Kubernetes, you don't really have that.
How would this solve the credentials? I mean,
because I manage that from the same API server. It's one API server for all of it.
So are you then using Kubernetes to define whether or not someone can take an action?
No, I have an RBAC rule on the API server, and the same RBAC rules are used for both synchronous as well as asynchronous tasks.
Okay, maybe because what I'm understanding is that we have on data server and gRPC endpoint that is perform action or do action or something like this, right?
Yes.
And if you call this gRPC function, then data server will go and perform that action onto the device.
Yes.
But somehow we need to protect this gRPC function now, or this endpoint, from anybody just randomly calling an action on it.
Yeah.
But somewhere we need to be able to manage who is allowed access to this endpoint.
So let's assume, so what I was trying to say, so today what we do is in config server, right? It is protected by the API server of Kubernetes, right? In which you have RBAC rules, right?
Yeah.
And so it exposes a gRPC interface, and we don't have MTLS enabled, I think, at the moment, but let's assume you have MTLS. You basically say, these are the guys that can talk to it, and nobody else with that certificate can talk to it, right?
Okay.
Now, because Kubernetes doesn't have a synchronous interface, right? It means for these actions that are not related to the config, you have to basically build another proxy to interact with data server. So in other words, you replicate the RBAC functionality that is needed that does all the authorization and authentication.
Mm-hmm.
You see? So what I was saying is that in Choreo, what I did is I allow for both synchronous as well as asynchronous tasks. So think of it as the equivalent of the Kubernetes API server, but then done differently. That allows for both synchronous as well as asynchronous operations. And as a result, you have a single point of RBAC control. You see?
Okay, but then this proxy would need to be authenticated with data server.
Yeah, no matter what. I mean, so the idea is that you have, yes, there's a mutual TLS connection that is set up between an entity that has the responsibility to do so, right? That doesn't change in both cases. You need that in both cases.
Does this extra complexity help? I mean, what we're saying is instead of going through generating an XML or using some library in a workflow that does this action call, we implement gRPC and data server that then accepts this action, that there's an action interface. We build this proxy that then is handling RBAC rules, or which is for authentication or authorization. And then is that a good balance? Yeah.
What I'm trying to say, Alexander, is you can achieve the same thing in both cases, right? So don't get me wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is that you need more components to achieve the same thing. So that's what I was trying to solve in Choreo, is to give you the ability to avoid having to put more components in place to do the same thing. You see?
Yeah, but we would need the same component, like it's the same number of extra components plus a bit of complexity for just
because
SDC.
You need a separate API server, right? That does that.
But this is like from Choreo, right? If it's just the SDC.
Yeah, correct. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like I'm comparing Choreo with something else at the moment, right? So in Choreo, it's more integrated. Is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. That was my only comment. Is that I see a reason for synchronous interfaces, right?
Yeah.
There is still a lot of imperative functions that need to be handled, and I think that's a disadvantage that you have today in Kubernetes systems, that they don't have very good support for it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's agreed.
Yeah. But it is what it is, right? That doesn't mean you cannot make it work.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But the question is, does it make sense to force it in this case, right? Just as this component rather than, I mean, we're already talking about having to have either a workflow engine or something behind it as well, which is.
Okay, you're asking, is it worth adding this complexity inside? I think the only reason I see where it makes sense, or that's where I believe, that's why I was saying tie it to config changes.
Yeah.
Right, so if that's for me where it makes sense, and that you do not have this challenge of the synchronous interface, because we solve the synchronous capabilities with this on-change stuff, you see? So the way we solve the synchronous behavior is that we still give declarative function, but we tell the data server, so the data server is implementing imperative behavior based on the data that it gets, and it can act upon that independently. So that is a thing that Kubernetes does good or well, right? And so that's where I think that's where I think I see potentially the reason to do it. Now, then I also said, if you do it, let's expose data server then this asynchronous interface, because if you use it in a different environment, you can leverage the same interface for other things. You see, so that's where my statement came from. So if you do it, you have to tell us whether it makes sense to do it in data server or not, right? Because it's still a lot of work that, of course, needs to have some value. But what I'm trying to say is that if we do it anyhow, then let's expose it that we can also implement it and use it independently of the Kubernetes system.
Okay. Yeah, understood. Fine.
That's where my comment came from.
So yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. But I think the first question is, does it make sense to do it as part of config change? That's, I think, the first question. If we believe that it has value, then I would, in data server, if we implement it, do it in such a way that we can leverage it broadly.
I mean, I think so, because we have, let's say, the case where what we're talking about, where you can update the database topology, right, to reconnect the different functions together. If you change some values in there, you probably want to update the state.
Yeah.
So I think having it linked to config changes is
that's also my view. Is like it seems really close. So it is collocated. It is tied to it, right? So otherwise, it becomes much more complicated to manage all of that stuff. So this is where I see the value.
Yeah. Agree.
Because it simplifies. We offload a lot of functionality if we do, I think, right? That doesn't mean that you still doesn't need the workflow and stuff like that on top of it to do the higher level dependency management.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, yeah, if there is a value to do it with the action, then we should do it. Yeah. Anyone else comment? Or yeah, we are running way over time, but I think it's good to try to close it. Otherwise, we will wait another week. But let's think about it, this discussion a little bit, and maybe we can, yeah, see whether we have other thoughts next week. But we should probably finalize the proposal at some point and then say, okay, let's go for it, right? Or not?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's very useful for us if we can have this also somehow in a state that we could show it. I'm planning on doing something with this kind of concept with actions in 2 months' time. So if we could have it done, at least something where we could show how it could look by then, that would be very useful for me as well.
Yeah. And so what would be your first biggest bang for the buck, per path or global?
Per path. I mean, it's for me, it's the same. Because the global would just be the root. Right,
Yeah,
so
just slash. Yeah, so it's
Okay.
yeah, it's slash basically, or yeah, but it doesn't matter. I agree. Sorry, yeah, stupid. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that I mean, it doesn't have to be final and perfect. It's just if we could have something there in 2 months' time or so, then I could also demo it as part of a project.
But what needs to happen? We need to have an action CR, so that's easy. So, but you can propose something like that, right? So that's the easy part. I would think I would not do the reference to the config in my view, Alexander, because we have this part thing, right? It makes it simpler, I think.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then the question is, what do we need to do on the data server to hook this up, right?
Yeah, we have to have the actions, or the actions read from the Yang schema, right?
Marcus, what do we have to change? So we have to tie to the schema, so to do some validation, or maybe that's not in the proof of concept, right? So we can just assume it works.
Yeah, that's also fine for the beginning, I think.
I mean, yeah, but I think maybe you and Alec and Marcus, you should look at this and see what needs to happen in data server, because that's where most of the work is, in my view, right?
Yeah, but also then there's the communication between config server and data server, if that needs to be,
Yeah, but it's very straightforward because you can tie it to the action change management that we have right now. We just give you all the actions to it, and then that's it. So it's actually very straightforward.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, Marcus, let's talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should, but we should definitely not forget about GNOI, right? So
Yes.
to yeah, make it a broader
Correct,
thing. Just as a final comment.
Yeah. No, I focused on the netconf stuff.
Yeah, correct, which is okay, right? So, yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's a good point, Marcus. Yeah, if they're very different, we could basically just have somewhere in the CR. Ideally, we want to avoid it. Have a differentiation between netconf and XML and GNOI. But
we'll have
ideally,
to.
we want.
We'll have to, because or we can.
Not necessarily, right?
Yeah, it can be deducted from the protocol, maybe, right?
See, I think you can still, but that's probably even more work, right? You could even say for actions, this is like you can discover it and and identify what needs to happen, like we do today, discover it, and or you can enforce it, right? To say, okay, for actions, I want to support netconf or I want to support GNOI. So you could, but I think, yeah, I think these are all things that we can enable afterwards, right? So probably the first thing is to say, okay, I get this action CR in the data server and assume that you have the right protocol to do it, see what needs to happen to instantiate it, and then I think what we can do when we create a target, give you some information whether you support or whether you're supposed to handle GNOI or netconf for actions, right? So we could give some information from the discovery to say whether what we do and don't, and then yeah. So we could make it more flexible. But I think the first thing is to say, okay, let's focus on netconf and let's see how that would integrate with the rest of the system. But think of it to be able to reuse it for any of them, right?
Yeah.
That's what we do today, right? A target, like we have today, read and write, right? You can have different protocols for read and write. We could say actions is a protocol, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's already, yeah. Then we are going through production mode, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, we'll sort something out, and there'll for sure be another meeting to
Yeah, sure. I
present
think
that.
what I'm trying, yeah, I think we have a high level concept, right? And then we can probably every week see where we are and then refine it from there. Right? Okay. So 7, I think next week we can take the topic. I don't know whether you're still around. We can take the CLI and SDK discussion as well, right? Yeah.
Sounds good. Perfect.
All right. Cool. Thanks, and sorry to run over.
Yeah.
But I think it was good. All right.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a
Right.
good